Hey guys, welcome to Unbiased Rugby. Today we're going to be talking about who's going to be succeeding Rassie as Springbok coach after 2019, the 2019 Rugby World Cup. There's so many names being bandied around of coaches that could be doing it. I just know how SAR operate. It's going to be really difficult for them to get an international coach in. Generally, it's always been that it used to always be that you had to be a Springbok before you could actually coach the Springboks. Then it had to be South African. So I just don't see them actually moving away from having a South African coach. There are a few names out there of coaches that will be available after the Rugby World Cup that could do it. Joe Schmidt, Warren Gatland, those are the kind of coaches that we're talking about. But they're in the conversation, but I just don't see that happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the various different coaches. So we've got obviously the 4 Super Rugby coaches. I'm not really doing the Pro 14 coaches, just doing the Super Rugby coaches, because it just looks like most of South Africa's players and coaching all comes from Super Rugby. So obviously we've got Swys de Bruin, Robbie Fleck, Robert Dupree and Putu Himan. Of those 4 coaches, I just don't think any of them are ready. The only one that I think might be a little bit ready is Swys de Bruin, because he is in the system at the moment. He is a tech coach for the Springboks, and so it might be a natural succession to actually, probably the only one that I could think of that could take on that job. Then so from South Africa, I'd probably only say Swys de Bruin could do it. There is another one, we could say Jacques Nienaber, because obviously with the continuity, and he has worked with Rassie quite a bit, because you understand that Rassie's not just, he's not going to be Springbok coach, but he is still going to be director of rugby, so he's still going to be the boss of the Springbok coach. So you need someone that he can work with quite closely, but I just don't know if Jacques Nienaber has the full on, not the skill. He obviously does have the skill, but I just don't know if he has had the experience as being a head coach even. Coaches that are South African coaches that are coaching overseas at the moment, we've got obviously Johann van Graan at Munster. I'd like to see how he does with Munster this year, the Pro 14 and the European Championship, before I make my decision on him. Obviously with Johann Ackermann, who obviously had great success at the Lions. And Swys de Bruin. My only concern with those 3, because the 3 that I'm talking about, Swys de Bruin, Johann van Graan and Johann Ackermann, is they haven't had any silverware, and they haven't had success at Pro 14, they haven't had success at or Pro 12 or Pro 14, they haven't had success at Super Rugby. They may have success at Currie Cup level, but that's a 3rd tier competition, and I feel that there should be some. You should have some kind of silverware. You should understand how the winning ways to obviously be Springbok coach. Going across, the only one that I was looking at other Super Rugby coaches outside of, and I'm not talking the Crusaders coach and all that. I think there's a big succession plan for him. But the only one that I could think of would probably be John Plumtree. Not South African, but he has obviously coached the Sharks. He understands the systems really well in South Africa, so it might be a fairly natural fit. And obviously the one really big coach, I just saw now that the 10-14 were releasing the interview with Warren Gatland, and it looks like he wants to take up a Super Rugby position, and I just have a feeling that it's eyeing maybe a New Zealand coaching position in the next couple of years. But the one thing I notice about, especially with New Zealand rugby, is that there's always a succession plan. So it's normally you have the head coach and the next coach, or attack coach, or defense coach, and then one of the inner circle coaches becomes the head coach. And there's almost like a transfer of intellectual property. There's a transfer of skills. There's a transfer from one coach to the next. Even if it wasn't successful, it just seems like there's a plan in motion for coaching. And it just creates that continuity, because the new coach can just add on to the existing systems. The players really understand those systems. So, and if I look at the history of the Springbok coaching, obviously there's no succession planning. You take Hanneke Meyer, Jake White, Alistair Coetzee. I think those were the last 3 coaches that the Springboks had. And literally they were fired on the day, and that was it. They walked out the door with no intellectual property, without transferring any intellectual property across to the next coach. And SARU actually have really bad relationships with these coaches, and it's difficult to have continuity from one coach to the next when that's it. You're fired, you move on, done. So I feel we should have a more of a continuity from one coach to the next. If I was a betting man, I'd probably say Rassie won't. He'll still be Springbok coach after the Rugby World Cup. That's where I think it's going to go. I think SARU are going to speak to him and say, listen, he needs to continue as Springbok coach, because the only other coach I could think of that fits that kind of mold would probably be Johann van Graan. You could obviously take on the position after that. If they were going to change the mold completely, I'd probably go for maybe a Warren Gatland. I think he's the right kind of coach. He's had great success with the Lions, great success with Wales. He's coached Ireland before, so I think he's the right kind of international coach to come in. But can he work with Rassie? That's the $1 million question. It's. Rassie does have a plan, and he is a director of rugby, but who's going to work with him the best? As betting man, I'm going to say it's either Rassie's going to stay on as Springbok coach, or we're going to have Johann van Graan, who's probably going to come up as the next Springbok coach. But listen, guys, I may have completely wrong. Maybe I've missed a coach, or maybe I've missed the mark completely. Please put down your comments down below who you think could be the next Springbok coach. Like I said, I still think Rassie's going to stay on. Listen, guys, I hope you have a great week. Chat soon. Bye.